Imagine you're a doctor, sitting in a hospital, busy at work, and boom, you suddenly realize everyone around you has vanished. You head toward the operating room, only to find that the surgeons who were in the middle of procedures have disappeared and the patients are all dead. You step out into the street and discover that everybody has vanished, to the point that planes are literally falling out of the sky because even the pilots have disappeared. So what's going on here? What exactly happened to the entire world? We'll find out by the end of this video. The movie begins with us seeing Paul. Paul, my friend, is the person in charge of operating the film reels in the movie theater. Anyway, during his break, Paul is sitting there reading a book called The Lost Colony. The book mentions a mysterious event that caused an entire island's population to vanish back in 1590. When researchers went to that island, they found nothing but the people's clothes, along with the word Croatoan carved into a tree in the middle of the island. At that moment, Paul doesn't think too much of it because he assumes it's just a piece of writing, so he gets up to continue his job. But suddenly, without warning, the power goes out across the entire place. Luckily, Paul is wearing a headlamp, so he can still see. The problem is, he notices that everyone else is gone, leaving only their clothes behind. Naturally, he's terrified and has no idea where everyone went. Fortunately, after a while, his friend appears, and by chance, he also has a flashlight. At that point, his friend goes with him to check on the generators. They both head over to the generator room, but all of a sudden, his friend seems to get swallowed up by the darkness and disappears like everyone else. Paul practically has a heart attack from the shock, and then, boom, darkness ambushes him as well. During the same time, everything that happened to Paul is happening to Dr. Rose, who was working in a hospital, only to find everyone there gone too. The frightening part is that she comes across a patient whose abdomen was open on the operating table, and because the doctors vanished along with the power, the patient dies. Seeing that scene horrifies Rose, and she runs home. Once she arrives, she's in for another shock. Her husband and child have disappeared too. She breaks down, screaming and crying. The next morning, we see the news anchor, Luke, waking up and getting ready to head to work at the studio. The moment he steps outside, he realizes everyone is gone, leaving only their clothes. He's completely stunned because the entire city looks empty. Then, out of nowhere, a plane crashes right in the middle of the city. Again, presumably because the pilot disappeared. Shaken, Luke immediately runs to the studio in hopes of finding someone he knows. But when he arrives, he sees that everyone there has vanished as well. Undeterred, he keeps searching, to the point that he decides to check the camera recordings to find out exactly when everyone disappeared. That's when he notices that all the programs had been broadcasting normally, until suddenly the transmission cut off and the cameras went dead. He's horrified because there's no logical explanation for what's happening. Eventually, Luke finds another recording by someone who explains that the darkness reached his home, and at that moment, he heard his deceased brother calling out to him, trying to lure him into the darkness. But the man was scared and didn't go through with it. He recorded that video to let everyone know that this is all a trap set by the darkness to swallow you whole, and that you can protect yourself with light. So always keep a flashlight handy, because that way, the darkness can't touch you. Before ending the video, he says he's in Chicago if there's anyone else out there who survived, so they can find him. Right after that, the power in Luke's place cuts out, so he quickly opens a window to protect himself from the darkness. In general, 3 days later, we see Luke wandering around the city, which by now has been almost completely consumed by darkness. He's looking for any car that might still be working so he can leave town and head for Chicago. Indeed, he finds a car, but its battery needs charging. So Luke gets out, and at that moment, he notices a casino with its lights still on. He goes inside without a second thought and starts collecting any batteries he comes across. Then he sits down to rest for a bit. That's when a kid named James appears, pointing a gun at Luke because he's scared Luke might kill him. Luke reassures him, explains who he is, and mentions that he's a well-known presenter who would never hurt him. James relaxes, lowers the gun, and starts talking to Luke. He explains that the power is on here because there's a generator in the basement and that his mom is the one who got it running. But she's not around right now because she went to the church hoping to find someone, and she told James to wait here. Luke is thrilled there's a working generator because maybe he can charge up the car's battery with it. So he asks James to help him with that plan and to come with him when they get the car running so they can leave the city. But James refuses because he wants to wait for his mother to come back with anyone else who might still be out there. Luke gets irritated and yells at James, telling him the entire city has been devoured by darkness and nobody is alive anymore. He explains he's been searching every street for 3 days looking for anyone who might be alive. It's gotten so dark that the sun barely comes out for a few minutes before the darkness returns to swallow the city again. James is devastated by these words and starts crying because he realizes his mother might be gone. Luke is about to leave the casino to bring the car closer when he suddenly runs into Dr. Rose at the door. Rose is still in shock, crying over the disappearance of her child, Manny. She came to the casino because her husband used to go there, hoping he might have brought Manny with him. But she falls apart again in tears when she can't find either her husband or her son. After a while, Rose calms down, thanks to James, who comforts her and explains who he is and who Luke is. At the same time, not far from the casino, we see Paul, the movie theater worker, lying on the ground with a severe head wound. He manages to get up and heads over to a small patch of light nearby, screaming for someone, anyone to come help him. Because of his shouting, Luke and the others hear him. They rush outside the casino, and Luke follows the sound of Paul's voice. He finds Paul and tries to support him so they can head back to the casino, but the darkness is creeping up on them fast. Luke notices this and quickly switches on a strong light source, which forces the darkness to back off. Then Luke helps Paul, and they both hurry as fast as they can through the darkness, closing in on all sides. Luke is so tense that he slips badly on his injured leg while helping Paul, and they both go down. Somehow, Luke manages to get back up, supports Paul again, and thankfully, they make it safely back to the casino. Rose starts giving Paul first aid since the bleeding from his head is severe. Paul is terrified as he explains to everyone how all the people in the cinema vanished. What's even more horrifying is that while he was walking through the street, his flashlight went out for just a moment, and something unknown attacked him and struck his head. But when the flashlight came back on, that thing was gone into the darkness. Obviously, this story scares everyone, but they try to keep themselves together as best they can. They help Paul change into clean clothes, and they all sit down to talk about the possible reasons behind this phenomenon. Suddenly, without any warning, the generator starts to weaken and the lights flicker. Immediately, they switch off any unnecessary lights until the remaining ones become stable again. Then they head down to the generator. Paul examines it and tells them it's on the brink of failing completely. It's going to shut down soon. Everyone realizes their time is basically running out. Paul recalls that what's happening now is exactly like what happened in 1590, according to the book he was reading at the start of the film. So he tells them what was written in the book. In 1590, there was a British colony living on an island with 117 inhabitants. One day, a ship arrived from London bringing supplies for those 117 people, but the big shock was that no one was there. Everyone had disappeared, leaving only their clothes behind. The soldiers searched the island for days, and all they found was a single word carved into a tree, Croatoan. Then Paul passes out because of his head injury. They move Paul out of the basement, and Rose starts caring for him. Meanwhile, Luke has had enough of waiting around. He wants to leave. He tells everyone they have to get out before the generator dies and the darkness swallows them inside the casino. He also tells them there are survivors in Chicago and that they can get there by car, but first they need to charge the car's battery. They'll have to bring the car here next to the casino so they can power it up from the generator before it fails. The others are worried about leaving the casino at all, but in the end, they agree since it seems to be the only option. So Rose decides to go with Luke to bring the car back, while James stays behind to care for Paul. Rose puts on a backpack full of flashlights, hands James a separate light source, and says her goodbyes before heading out with Luke. As soon as they step outside, they run as fast as they can toward the car. When they finally reach it, they start pushing it back toward the casino. After a while, Luke's leg injury flares up and he can't push anymore. He and Rose have to take a break. Then, out of nowhere, they see a little girl emerge from the darkness, holding a flashlight. She's scared of them and runs off. Without thinking, Luke chases after her, hoping to save her from the dark. But Luke trips on his injured leg, and his flashlight flies out of his hand. The darkness almost engulfs him, but Rose quickly turns on the car's headlights and rushes to help him. They manage to get back to the car together. However, their flashlights start dying one by one. Rose props Luke up and leads him to a nearby hospital. There, she pulls out some matches from a drawer and lights the torch Luke is carrying. She also starts looking in the storeroom for any alcohol they can use to keep the torch burning. Everything is going okay until Rose suddenly hears her son Manny's voice coming from the darkness outside in the street. She immediately runs toward it and the darkness swallows her up. She disappears. Luke sees this happen and is devastated. He couldn't stop her. He hurries back to the car and starts pushing it again toward the casino. Meanwhile, James is tending to Paul, cooling him down because his fever is high. Then James steps away to get some water. At that moment, Paul senses the light fading and the darkness creeping in on him. He calls out to James, but James doesn't hear him. Unfortunately, the power in the casino flickers out completely for a few seconds. Thankfully, James is safe because he's wearing a light source around his neck. But when he goes to check on Paul, he finds that Paul has been swallowed by the darkness and has vanished. James is terrified and rushes to the basement to sit by the generator, but the darkness tries to lure him in, using his mother's voice to draw him closer. Just in time, Luke arrives and rescues James, who hugs him and tearfully tells him that Paul vanished and Rose also disappeared. Luke reassures him that everything will be okay, and once James calms down, Luke takes him outside to the car. Luke then connects one end of a cable to the car battery and instructs James to get in the car and start the engine once Luke hooks the other end to the generator. Luke hurries to the generator, attaches the cable, and yells for James to start the car. After several tries, they finally manage to charge the battery. The darkness is chasing Luke, but he manages to escape and get into the car at the last second. They speed off, and then Luke stops to close the hood and remove the cable from the battery. Unfortunately, when he does this, James catches sight of the church where his mother had gone. Without thinking, James jumps out of the car and runs into the church. Luke tries to stop him but fails, so he drives the car in on his own. As he's driving, Luke spots the word Croatoan carved onto the bridge. He realizes it's the same phenomenon that happened on that island, and it's just going to keep happening until they all perish, just like those people did centuries ago. Determined, he turns the car around and goes back for James. By then, the darkness is gathering inside the church. Luke crashes the car through the church doors, yelling for James to get in the car. James doesn't listen, and to make matters worse, the car's headlights die. In a shockingly grim moment, the darkness envelops Luke and he vanishes. James is left crying and ends up sitting in the middle of the church, surrounded by candles that keep the darkness at bay. A few hours later, the sun rises and James survives thanks to the candles. That little girl from earlier appears again and sits with him. They talk for a bit, then head out together, eventually finding a horse, which they ride as they search for any other survivors. Before long, the sun disappears again, the darkness takes over, and the film concludes with the possibility that James and that little girl might be the only humans left. There's no real proof anyone in Chicago is alive. And that's the end of the movie. That's all. Goodbye.